Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're going to be working on another flea market find of mine, which is the Penn Jigmaster. Now this one's a little bit of an older variety one. It's got the burgundy side plates to it, and it was made in the USA. The current models that are out there are now made in China, but constructed pretty much using the same pieces and parts. Although I have to be honest, I've seen some degradation in things like springs and bridge plates and the others that are no longer either the right thickness or not made of the stainless gears and the like. But this is an ocean reel about the size of a 3.0. It's known for its one screw take-apart system. It's a fairly heavy-duty reel, but it does need to be maintained in order to make the most of it. And this one's a flea market find, so when I purchased it, it's a little tough to turn. Had some line on it that was left on for some time, so you can see that there's been an accumulation of dirt and grime. And we'll just take it apart today. I'll show you the basic assembly, disassembly, and assembly of this, how to tune it up, and how to put it back into service. As I said, my group goes by the name of Second Tackle Service. Second Chance Tackle is the total of it, and the idea is to get it, to fix it, to put it back out there. So quickly, you just saw that. It was one screw, a quick turn, and you can take the side plate off, which is the business side of it. You have access to the bearing side plate, and you have the spool comes out easy enough. That gives you the opportunity, first off, if you're buying the reel, to take a look at it, if the seller will allow you to take it apart. But secondly, you can see a lot of what's going on in the reel. For example, on the bearing side plate, it's in good condition, and the clicker, which is actuated by this little tab here on the side and runs off of the teeth in the back, you can tell that there's not much wear on it. So that's a good sign that the reel has not been abused or used too much. The spool itself seems to be true, other than the buildup of some crud on there from line, probably hasn't been washed off. And then if you look at the inside, you'll notice there's a stainless steel plate, which is nice, but I noticed there's a lot of shellacking or just dirt and grime. So let's go ahead, show you how to clean this up, restore the reel, and get it back to nice working condition and out fishing again. So the first thing you want to do is take off the handle assembly. That'll give you access to the gears. First part is a screw that holds the handle nut in place. It's a little stop screw. And as you'll notice, I'm using gloves, latex gloves. I prefer to do that because it keeps the oils and grease off your hands. And as you can tell, these have been used before. And I like to keep a parts tray. In this case, it's just the bottom of a milk jug, but it holds all the small parts and enables you to get them without searching all over your workbench trying to figure out where they went. So the handle nut comes off first. Secondly would be to take the handle nut off. Some of you may have the wrench that comes with the Penn reels. In this case, I have a more industrial kind of one that handles both the smaller size and the 6.0 variety handle nuts. So it's counterclockwise to take the nut out, and after a few turns you can usually get that nut out. If it comes out with any more difficulty, it's another red flag that you have in terms of what's been going on in that reel itself. To take the handle off, simply remove it. Sometimes if those handles are stubborn, if they've been caked on, an easy way to back it off is just simply to back off the star drag, which you need to do anyway. And when you're doing that, it'll force or lever the other piece out. Behind that comes, now see, something's wrong here, because that belongs inside the reel, not outside the reel. So that's kind of an interesting look. So somebody's done some service on this one before and hasn't put it back properly. And then you have the ferrule, which decompresses against the drag washers. And now you're ready to take the reel apart inside and out. So 4 screws attach the bridge assembly. I'm going to go take them off now. I use a small electrician's screwdriver because that rubber piece, which is intended not to give you a shock as an electrician, kind of makes it easy to turn from this standpoint. And the blade is about a 1/4 inch blade, maybe 3/16. Now this is a reel that has the springs for the anti-reverse dog on the drive plate, so there's no surprise factor here, so you can simply loosen the screws and then remove the assembly and turn the screws over to get your screws out, and again put those into point. The inside of this is very similar to almost all of the Penn reels that are made. You have a carrier sleeve and the pinion gear. You have the connector between the free spool and the gear sleeve, and the operation of that is driven by the back. As you throw the line, the lever, it'll either engage or disengage that spool, and you have the spring, which is the tensioner for that. This spring tends to go on these. It's something that does wear out over time, and something you should examine when you bring that reel apart. So I'm going to put the gears aside, remove the gear assemblies. This one comes simply, I take it, disengage it and pull it over, and you'll see it's got a big and a small hole for that. Here's your carrier for your pinion gear, and then there's 2 springs that fit in those little indentations there. So that'll give us a good view of it. The side plate is very clean, so it may have degraded service, but not because of any particular problem with buildup of excessive grease or dirt or grime or that. So the easiest thing to do is just try and clean that out. I use a paper towel. You can use some degreaser if there's a severe buildup in there. That degreaser can be either a WD-40 or a Purple Power, for example, but in this case it just comes off with a simple wipe. Another tool that you can use is a cotton swab, and that'll help you get some of the grease out as well if it's stuck in some of those hard to reach places. So this is good. All it really is required here is some basic lubrication. So I use Penn reel grease for almost everything. I'm going to use it here too. I'll grease the drive side bearing, and I'm going to put a little grease up on that free spool piece, and then just set that aside for a moment. So now we're going to go look at the drags and make sure that this assembly is turning correctly. And in the case of taking the drags apart, you just simply remove the main gear. That'll pop up the drags. And then they come off, and this is interesting. We have one drag that's been replaced, but the others have not. You can see the base drag in there, but very high wear on that second one. You can also notice that it's compressed and it's laying on the washer, so that's no good. We're going to take that off. To do that, I use a utility knife if they're stuck. Just keep your hands free if you do that. But we've got a problem here with this reel, and that's one of the reasons why you find these at flea markets, right? They tend to give up. This one's serviceable, but it's worn as well. So I'm going to go ahead and replace those. So the way that the drag's set up is it's a 7-washer system. It goes fabric drag, fabric drag, metal drag with the ears, fabric drag, metal drag, cap. So I think what they did with that spacer washer that I said didn't belong there, they probably had the worn drags, and I suspect that was their way of building it back up. So metal drags you want to clean up, and I use a chrome polish, a turtle wax to do that, and a little bit of steel wool. And that stickiness that you had on there, probably from just accumulated oils or something, can be cleaned right off with some abrasive polish and steel wool. Or you can go ahead and, if it's severely pitted, you might want to go ahead and just get the whole replacement set. They're the HT100 drags available from Penn. In this case, it seems to be just cleaning up okay. So we'll go ahead and get rid of those. Okay, so I have a couple of new drags off camera I'm going to get, and then we'll be ready to reassemble this. So the Jigmaster's, it's got a general use to it that's for heavy-duty fish, and it's been around a long time. The new ones I'm not as happy with, but the older ones, they seem to just stand up to the test of time. So we're going to use the replacement. Now, when you're replacing drags, if they're fabric drags, you should use a drag lube, and in this case, this is a universal grease. It's Cal's drag. And loose, and gear lubrication, and it's good to coat both sides. I like to do it on the metal washer as opposed to the fabric, but you could do either. But just make sure you put a nice coating on there. That'll help keep the drags from adhering to the metal washers, and it'll also provide an anti-slip. I'm going to go ahead and go do that. As you can tell, I got the new drag there now. So it goes fabric drag, metal washer, fabric drag, and then it goes to the eared washer in the middle set. The ears have the two ticks on them, and they sit right in the indentations on the drag assembly, and then the final drag. Reset. So one of the reasons why this why this reel was probably turning so difficultly is that those drags were pressed on and didn't allow it to move freely. And then you have the cap screw, which is what the ferrule on the other side will sit on. The only other thing I need to do on that assembly then is to grease the little anti-reverse dog that's there, and I use a real oil. In this case it's Real X. You can use 3-in-1 oil, or you can use another machine oil. All of those would work equally. So reversing the process now, we're going to go put the screws back, the springs back in those indentations. And then I want to check these the carrier assembly for the pinion gear. Just make sure that's well lubed, cleaned, lubed, and then we'll put that back in. As you can tell, there's a lot of crud on here as well. That probably has a reason for making the reel operate tight as well. So again, with the steel wool, in this case it's a 4-0 steel wool. That's plenty just to get the stuff off of that. Grab a little bit of the reel grease. So I find that the two major flaws in reels requiring maintenance, the first one is that there's not enough grease, and in the second case, believe it or not, is too much grease. Just so a light coating does it, especially if you're going to do your own reel maintenance. You can take these apart at the end of the season, which is what I'm doing now, and just make sure that it all works. I'm having trouble with this spring here because it's catching on my glove of all things. So the downside of using these latex gloves is that you lose a little bit in terms of the ability to handle small parts. Okay, so we've replaced this carrier assembly for the pinion gear. Now we're going to go put the main gear assembly back in. And the best thing to do there is just press down on the pinion gear, and then make sure that it seats. The Jigmasters have little plastic points coming out that the bridge assembly sits in. Just make sure it sits there, and holding it tight before you even put any screws back in. Just give a quick turn to make sure that it's operating functionally, which it is. So we'll put these back in. These are the bridge screws. There's two different types of screws. One's completely threaded and the other one has got only a short thread on it, smooth surface. The smooth surface ones go on top. That's because they are the channel for those springs that we had just replaced, and that helps you avoid the springs catching on the threads of the other screws. So just go ahead and tighten them back up with the your screwdriver. And snug. You don't need to over tighten these. You need to make sure they're tight, because if you're on a boat, the vibrations of the engine and the general running of that boat is going to loosen these things up from time to time. But if you snug them up good, maybe a quarter of a turn past, you should be fine. There we go. It's having trouble catching the one screw. Okay, so that's how you take the core of the reel apart. You put it back together and make sure that it's adequately lubed. Then the other side that we need to work on, just can't get this one together for some reason. One of the best tools in my shop is a little centering pin, and I suspect that what I've got there is the screw coming over the side. So I'm just backing it off. These tend to just get misaligned from time to time. It's like anything else, a little bit of patience goes a long way. Okay, there we go, now we got it. Okay, and then a final check just to make sure that they're all tight. Tight but not over tight. And that the reel turns freely, which is what it does. And then we'll put back the ferrule for the drags. We'll eliminate that little one that they had there. Cosmetically, you can clean this up as well, same way. Use a little bit of chrome cleaner and a few strokes with the sandpaper, and you'll be, the steel wool, and you'll be fine with that. Next on goes the key, and on the drag, if you just hold the core pinion gear and turn, it's an easy way to assemble that. Same thing with the handle. It's got a little bit of tarnish in that. Again, if you just use that steel wool, that'll clean it up nicely. A little bit of chrome cleaner goes a long way, and just wipe it off, and it's like polishing an old-time bumper. With the handle in place, just a little bit more of real grease against that pinion. I'm going to restore that nut, and again, you can see I go to my parts tray because I know that's where the parts are rather than looking all around the bench for them. Seat that. Seating the handle nut. Use that wrench to tighten it down. Again, you don't need to over tighten this, but do make sure that it's snug. And then you want to line up that little indentation in the handle nut so that you can put your lock screw in place. And that's the last piece of the drive side. Service is just finishing with that lock nut. Okay, so the lock nut is in place, and the last piece I like to lube is that little connector between the free spool release and the piece. So you can see it's a lot cleaner now on the inside. So from the bearing side now, again for cosmetics, you can clean up the the chrome a little bit on top if you see any severe tarnish or the like. That'll work fine. Little dab of the lubrication in the bearing itself. Again, you don't have to go crazy with this, and maybe a little bit on the clicker. And then I'd like to examine the plate here, make sure all these are tight, because the two nuts on the two screws on the bottom here tend to get loose and throw it out of alignment. In this case, yep, sure enough, that's loose. And this one as well. So if there's misalignment, sometimes that's the reason why a reel will turn tight as well, and sometimes that'll lead to a spool going out of true. And then finally, we've got a spool with a lot of buildup on it, so we're going to go again. We're going to take that piece of steel wool. We'll just clean up all of that tarnish. You could use a degreaser on it. Depends what you got here. Sometimes it's the salt buildup from the ocean, and it's actually corroded into the spool. Those need to be a more aggressive cleaner. Sometimes it's just simply some varnish or dirt and the like, and that comes off a little bit easier. And then I'll use a paper towel just to take that off. And again, that's cosmetics, but you know what? It helps to have clean reels and clean parts. It works the best that way. All right, so that prettied that up. So now we're going to reassemble. It's the spool goes back into the bearing side complex. The plate comes back on. You line it up. It's a quick turn till the centering pin meets the hole. Tighten down the hole. Check for the adjustment on the spool. That's a little tight. So the bearing, another common problem that folks have is they tighten this bearing down way too much. There should be a little bit of play in the spool itself. You can hear a little bit of a knock there. That's probably just a little bit too much. And then now we got a free spooling reel. You check the piece, make sure you got your anti-reverse working. You can throw the lever to free spool and turn it, and quite a difference from what it was a few minutes ago when we started this. So I hope that helps you. I hope that shows you how to do your drag replacement, how to do the lubrication on it, how to look for some common flaws in the reel, and how to put it back in service. So again, I thank you. It's Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and I hope you view my other videos as well. Thank you.